Okay, with the bigger capacitors there and there, I'm going to crank it a little bit. You'll see that dimming of the lamps, but it doesn't. I don't think it's doing that DC. It doesn't do that starving, like DC to the speaker thing. One more time, I'll do the volume here. I think that gives it the reserve it needs. Well, that's one's opinion here anyway. All the capacitors on the audio amp board have been replaced. And the filter capacitors for the plus and minus, I went with 4700 at 63. I think there were 3500s at 35 in there. And how I built them up a little, I just used bicycle tire inner tube cut up. Just did a couple wraps so they fit nice and tight. I've gone ahead and changed most in the preamp section. I still have 7 to go, the 4.7 at 50s, which I may put 100s in because I have them. I know that's a little higher. Twice as high, but I don't think it'll be an issue. I've gone ahead and made reference because I do not have a schematic for this unit as to which all the negatives are, and I've checked and checked and checked again, and I do a power up test after each couple capacitor changes. There's a few in there yet. Okay, there's all our 4.7 at 50s I replaced with the Nichicon 4.7 at 100s. Everything about this receiver I think is made on marginal parts. You know, to use just enough. I'm almost thinking that they were recent students, or they were students or something, and this engineering students, and this was their some of their designs, so to speak. But I've checked the polarity again and again, and that's a tight area. And these capacitors are very hard to see which one is minus. But for the most part, the negative faces the front on all of those, and the negative faces the back on most of those. While I was under here, I noticed there's only one ground. How this chassis gets its grounds, it appears, is possibly on the corners, not so much the amplifier. That may have a ground run going to it with all those. I've resoldered most of the grounds, that one there on the preamp. I'm going to hit this one here in the tuner. This is a chassis ground. As with anything, of course I bridged the two connections there to ground, or one of them to ground, so I made sure that they're not shorted to ground. Okay, so we're going to test one more time to make sure we didn't mess up anything in that phase. I'll put the power on here. I'm going to snap it on over at the isolation transformer. Well, it's on direct. I'm not running this isolated, but in any event. My stereo is acting a little funny. There we go.
Ideas on things to do this winter in Boston. Brought to you by Lubriderm Intense Skin Repair Lotion. Soothe your skin.
Okay, no worse.
For 24 hours.
It might just be me, but I think this is sounding better and better and better as more are replaced. Okay, one note on some things. I think there is a noisy transistor in one of the channels. That's not what you're hearing at the moment. I'm just showing the mute function here. Mute is on. It still works. I just don't have another one to compare it to. I don't know if that's factory or a noisy transistor. That's both channels that does that in between.
Plus, you'll also win a pair of tickets in the Celtic Suite with food and drink.
But in between, it would normally be. There's a lot of computer hash here too and whatnot.
Wash your hands as often as you can.
It's working well. Of course, the last capacitor I'm changing, this one right here, I have to note the polarities as I take them out. This one's all kind of wrapped and long leaded. It's oh, what a mess to get that one out of there, and that's the last one. I don't know if you can see it moving there, but okay, that's the last one. Negative faces the control panel. And there it is. This one was a mess. Look at that length on that positive lead. It was all twisted around the cladding. It's the hardest one to get out yet. The last one. And again, it's a 4.7 at 25. I've never had such a hard time getting a capacitor in there. So I'm going to take a tip from the arcade guys. I got a piece of rubber tubing. I had to put a little piece of masking tape on there. And I'm going to stick it in there because I have dial strings, wires, everything is in my way here, and as I try to get it in those two holes down there, it's fighting me the whole way. Thank heavens for positive leads longer than the other. As I'm up against the dial string, and as I push, the other lead opens up. Oh, so close, see? And then I'll grab it with my needle nose and push it the rest of the way in. And there's the other end. There's a transistor here, and it's quite dense right there, so I'm going to solder that up. Well, just as they did, I left a little bit of a long lead on this going to the emitter of that transistor. I believe that's the emitter. That's it. We'll clean some of the flux off in these spots that we've soldered, and yeah, that's going to do it. I'm going to dust off the upper side of the chassis, vacuum a little bit, and I want this thing back together. Okay, I've cleaned some of the connections off with the flux remover, and I don't know, I remember when these were being imported, we used to say, boy, they're not even cleaning the flux off the boards, which I think this has a coating on it actually. So I've gone and hit some of the spots where I've soldered, and the ground and the heavy soldering. I didn't go too crazy, and I don't like spraying stuff around a nice plastic control panel because you have a chance to frost it or the chemical get on the plastics. So okay, that's it for there. We're going to give it one more run test here. Okay, one last look at the top. So literally, I don't usually do this, and you won't find many folks that will. I've literally changed every electrolytic capacitor in this thing. The only thing I don't like, and I may change later, I have to take note, this one, and that one, when I started out of those Chinese no name, well, they have a name on them, capacitors, but I'm a little leery because I did a flat screen monitor once that had about 20 little ones in it. I changed them all, and the monitor worked, which I was much to my surprise, but then it quit again after a short period of time. So I'm a little suspicious of these capacitors. They are 105 degree rating, but I've heard the electrolyte is not the best quality in those. Some even have said it's water. and there's the bigger one for the preamplifier section. It was 1,000, it's a 2,200, and that also helps with the power buffering. And again, the main one's there. Okay, we'll do one last power up here. This time I'm going to power it up on auxiliary, and I want you to hear out of, well, it was one speaker, now the other one, but when you initially power it, it goes away, but you'll hear what I'm thinking is a noisy signal transistor. You hear it a little in that one over there. It's usually this one over here. And then it goes away quickly. Perhaps just the soldering alone around the transistors. I believe if it is noisy, it's in this section down here.
So there will be
in all the testing, I failed to check the AM, but the AM is fine still. A lot of noise, basically.
My good friends, let me
Okay,
introduce you to
so being around when most of these songs were out, I tell you, they don't sound right. It must be all the digital processing or something, or the compression. Some of the local stations who like play vinyl or whatever, still they'll sound the way radio used to. But this stuff, it just does not sound right.
Details, but you're going.
Perfect, thank you. I'm so excited.
Who's going to be your ski partner?
Okay, I'm about to put the bottom back on. I did check all the connections on the magnification. I did find a couple I touched up earlier that was before, but and I don't know what to do about this stuff. This is a pet peeve. The machine screw, and they just drive any old thread into it. That one's probably okay, but you can see that's machine thread. That's machine thread. That means a machine screw goes in there, not a coarse one. You don't do this to it. Again, while I put the bottom back on this, it's a shame about those screws on the back. One thing I did want to mention, yes, they are machine screws, but they're metric machine screws. Look at where the thing is made, and that'll typically tell you whether it's SAE or metric. That dot on, I would say, Japanese or whatever, signifies that it's not SAE, that it's metric. I don't know exactly what they're telling you. If the dot means, hey, it's metric. Okay, so we see a screw, the dot on it, that's typically what they're trying to tell you. There's a machine screw on the left, and on the right, it's what someone tried to, you know, match what was in there, but there's no dot on that, and that's a self-tapper. That's a machine. So basically I have 4 washers, 5 screws, and the 4 cover screws. And that gargantuan one that someone had put in here. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vacancies. That'll take a machine screw, and I don't have any. So I'll find the matching. I don't know what I'm going to do here. I may just have to go with the self-tappers because they've already been done, but perhaps I could get a couple of, I could probably get one in that one, the machine, the correct one. Okay, I found the proper threaded screw for there. I believe that's from a Panasonic or something. So I have all the machine screws in. I know this one isn't a flathead, but that's the correct thread for the one that was missing here. They put another self-tapper in there, but that won't scratch anything. So I think for back here what I'll do is these 4 with the washers. I have 4 new screws, and these are metric. They have the dot on them, and these are new. This was in a screw kit from, I believe, a Ricoh copier. They're one size up, but I think if I tap those 4, we'll have 4 at least matching on the rear cover. Okay, before I finish up, one thing in closing. You should be watching this on Farm Radio YouTube channel. Going back, we're going to review what we did here. I have all the capacitors and my notes in here. So as this thing fades into the past, I can have some recollection of what I may have done. The main filter capacitors and whatnot. I did get another, I believe this LM1304N. I thought it was a good idea. They were available, not many of them. This is the FM multiplex chip. The way this was acting earlier, I believe I had some solder from the solder sucker or a bridge or something, because it was doing that muting, not sounding good thing in the earlier part of the video. But there's the multiplexer. I think that's going to stay in the Morse box. And some talk about the stereo indicator light. I'm going to keep the stereo indicator lamp that's in there. I have a 25 milliamp 12 volt grain of wheat bulb, they call them. So other folks have changed them to LED. I've got the Radio Shack 15 milliamp LED, which the resistor is already in it for 12 volts. But there was another video online where a gentleman did this, and it either stayed biased on too much or it didn't go out during the stereo indicator. So what they did, and I don't know where people come up with these ideas, is he put a resistor in parallel with the LED. Now this has a resistor in series with it, of course, so it'll run on 12 volts. Why the resistor in parallel? So he had two resistors, and that struck me kind of odd. Everyone has their ideas. We can't always think or know what's going on in someone's head, but they came up with that. And I don't claim to know everything myself. So, I have a schematic here. I'll get some focus. This is from a Morse 6400. The one made in Hong Kong or whatever. Totally different than this one. But what I found interesting is I looked at the LED stereo light coming off the chip. And they have the same configuration. They have a resistor, and then they paralleled a resistor, a 470 ohm across the LED, and they tell you the milliamps, 2.19 volts at 16 milliamps. So there you have the two resistors. Very similar setup here, but this is a different chip. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to talk about was this thing had to be made in Korea. So there weren't many manufacturers in 1976, the 70s. There wasn't much going on there. So who made this thing? I was thinking it has to be Samsung. Let me get some focus. This thing has to be Samsung or Goldstar. They were the only two major manufacturers that I was aware of. Hyundai must have been around too, making products. I say the Scott over here has similarities, also made in South Korea, has similarities, same time frame. And the only thing I could find on the web, I was leaning more towards Goldstar because I can't find anything on this model. And this I found on this is a Pinterest or something, but here is a Goldstar. And what strikes me, I'll get more focus here. It says Goldstar stereo receiver 754, I think. But those meters are talking to me. It has the same, I mean, they are the same, even in a blurry shot. And it has the microphone and the headphones, a little different setup on the tuning, but I'm going to say for what it's worth that this is a Goldstar. Another thing, while we're on the LEDs, now I have LEDs everywhere, and outside lights, interior lights. These have the fuse bulbs, which are still good. The only indicator that was out was a stereo light. I could replace it with LED if I care to. I did order some fuse lamps for another receiver. I believe a realistic. Anyway, I'm okay with the fuse lamps. Heat is not too much of a problem. That's what you benefit from LEDs. But I've had LEDs that don't last as long as some lamps do. If it isn't broken, I'm not fixing it. And I'm not a fan, everyone has their own taste, but I'm not a fan of the glowing green or blue, unless the receiver came with it. I don't like the retrofit green and all the fancy colors people have. I just want it to look the way it did when it was purchased. So that's my little rant on that. I'll get the cool white if I were to get LEDs. You could have warm white. I don't know. I ordered cool white. Okay. Let's put the cover on and fire this up one last time. Okay, I'm going to do a test here other than radio. I'll check the tape input. You may or may not have caught the other videos of the Boxcar Willie seems to be my test tape here, and seeing this is a new to me tape deck here. I did test it. It has activity on the meters and it looks pretty clean. I wiped the capsons down. I should use deck 2 because everyone runs the crap out of deck 1. That looks okay. I've wiped them both down. This one has a little trouble with fast forward, but it plays fine. Do tape monitor here. This has trouble with fast forward when I tried the other day. Yeah, it's having a little trouble. This is an Optimus end of Radio Shack, which is actually a Sanyo. Don't ask me how I know that. I can tell by the serial number label that this is a Sanyo. So they make good tape decks. Now, I was looking for a tape that I actually made on this receiver back then, or this model, not this exact one, but the same one. And the oldest one I just happened to stumble across. The oldest one is John Lennon, when the night he passed away or was shot. That was 12/8/80. And I have one from April of 81 and one from December of 81. Give you a sample of the... I must not have wanted the chromium setting or something on there. That's the top 10 of 1981. Yeah, I got one side of John Lennon. Oh, great, I can't rewind it. I'll try. Yeah, maybe this thing's having trouble. Oh, come on. It's better than it was the other day. Come on. This stuff just... This is a smoker's set too, you can tell. That's why it doesn't work. It smells like nicotine. It won't eat the tape though. The tires in there are a little nicotined, I bet. Alright, don't ruin my tape.
Things that dreams are made of. Starting off the BCN Top 10.
Well,
on your rock and roll.
That's the beginning of the top 10. Okay. Basically on this tape I just went up and down the dial here. I may not even... It's the old radio. You know, geez, I'll use the little Optimus to rewind the tape that the big Optimus can't. But I want to point out something. When they're playing this song, you can actually hear the vinyl, you know, the record in the break. You know you should be. You can tell they probably just pulled any copy off. Okay, rewind this in the little Optimus. John Lennon shot. What I did was I just went up and down the radio dial, and yeah, towards the end they just started playing music, but this is right after it happened, so I'll give you a little sample. I can just smell nicotine coming out of this tape deck. This one. Now, let's get to a spot where there's some talking. Alright, we'll take it from the top here. I always gave some leader.
Lennon, who turned 40 in October, was pronounced dead at Roosevelt Hospital shortly after that shooting tonight. And
I don't know why there's no left
shooting
channel.
occurred outside the Dakota.
Tape decks didn't work the best back then either.
Where Lennon lived with his wife Yoko Ono. Police also say they have a suspect who they describe as a local screwball with no apparent motive at all for the shooting at Lennon. Jack Douglas, Lennon's producer, said he, the singer, and his wife had been in a studio called the Record Plant at 44th Street earlier Monday night tonight, and that Lennon left at 10:30 p.m., about an hour and 40 minutes ago. Douglas said Lennon told him he was going to get a bite to eat and then go home. A pedestrian who was walking near the Dakota, Sean Strubb, told reporters at the hospital he had heard 4 shots, came around the corner to Central Park West, and saw John Lennon being put into the back of a police car. Strubb said the other people at the scene said they had heard 6 shots and said Lennon was hit twice. It was also said by Strubb that the others on the street told him the assailant had been crouching in the archway of the Dakota as if he were waiting for Lennon to come. Straub said that from what other passersby told him, Lennon arrived in the company of his wife and the assailant fired. Straub said the suspect, a pudgy kind of man, 35 to 40 years old with brown hair, was put into another police car in the scene, and Straub said the suspect had a smirk on his face as police took him away. So once again, very bad news tonight for the music world and for his family as well. John Lennon shot.
I don't know where the left channel is.
We'll be doing a tribute all night tonight with the Beatles and John Lennon music on Wacky 102 F.
And we will try to pay what little tribute we can to him, feature some of his music throughout the night. Let's begin with number 9.
Inside of his Manhattan apartment building tonight, we are playing Hey Jude all the way through on COZ. Hey Jude.
Well, we don't have time for that. As I said, this tape was played and played and played. Okay, this thing is getting into speaker blowing mode if we're not careful with it, so it's playing that well. I just want to do a sample. Again, this is just off the air commercial radio, and I don't believe a radio sounds the same as it did then as now. It's not better.
WBCN Boston, the band called A Flock of Seagulls, and Iran. Back to the BCN Top 10. Thank you, Harry. Go back into the closet now. Steve Miller Band now. Slipping down 1 spot to number 6. The title track of the new LP, Abracadabra, number 6 on the BCN Top 10. WBCN Boston Roxy Music. Pretty tune from their new LP, Avalon. Clash dropping out of number 3 from 2 last week. Should I Stay or Should I Go on BCN Boston.